Hey there, this is my Nara Kami deck. So similar to my other video, I'm just trying to show deck recipes, help other people maybe get into the game and show what they want to do. Here we go. So my Nara Kami deck, first of all, you have the choice, but I feel like using the v-eb12 starter is quite nice because I find it quite funny, a lizard with an electric blade, but that's my opinion. So as you know though, with riding, with all grade zeros and V now, you play it, you get to draw a card, so you don't lose anything. The other grade for a grade zero lineup is using 4 PG grade zero draw triggers. So because I'll explain later, but with this deck you do use up your hand a little bit to call out the field, so you can bind cards from your opponent's field and hand. And with Dragonic Vanquisher's ability, the more you bind, the more power you get, and some cards require placing on the ability, so the drawing cards to help replenish will be good. And that's why the other card I chose to include is 4 other draw triggers of Old Dragon Mage. That way, with 8 draw triggers, you won't run low on cards in your hand, and that should help stop like Revon and any other cards to have a lot of attacks on them to not inflict damage. Now the other card I chose to do was 4 yellow gem carbuckles. The only reason I decided to do 4 criticals is because with Vanquisher's ability to add power, I don't really feel like you need many criticals, because it's more like even if the person gets a front trigger, or any trigger, sorry, then it won't really matter that much, because you could add that critical to something else or add the draw trigger power. But I feel like using 8 draws to replenish hand is much better. And then 4 heal triggers, like as in most decks. But if you want to add 4 criticals or anything else, go ahead, because it's your choice. Now for the grade 1 lineup, the cards I decided to use were 4 cards of Mighty Bolt Dragon. So what it does is, if on a continuous rearguard ability, on your turn, if any card was bind, it gains 5,000 power. So that's quite good, because lots of these cards have binding abilities. So that will be at 13k. So it could even be used in the front or Excel marker if you don't have a grade 2. And also what's good is, if you don't have any grade 3 or you want a more specific one, you can use its ability to look at the top 5 cards of your deck and add 1 grade 3 to your hand, and then shuffle your deck. And if you did add a grade 3 to your hand, you've got to discard a card from your hand, so it could be useful for replacing cards you don't need. Other cards, another grade 1 to include are 4 Desert Gunner Banjum. The reason this is quite good is because with Vanquisher ability, choosing to bind a card from your own hand, you could bind this instead from your hand, because what quite good is that if it gets binded, you can call it to rearguard, so you don't even need to pay a negative cost from Vanquisher's ability. And then also when placed, if a card was binded for during that turn, whenever, you get to soul charge. So if you use Vanquisher's ability to bind this and then summon it, you get the soul charge as well, and you get to keep this card. So that's quite a good card to include. And lastly, I 4 Rising Phoenix, because when this card's in your drop zone, for whatever reason, like guarding, or if you were forced to discard it, such as Nupatama decks, then when you bind an opponent's card, you can call this card from the drop zone back onto rearguard. So if you're low on cards and you say you got all 4 in the drop zone, you can summon all 4 as either a booster or attacker or anything, and that could lead to your opponent being seriously under pressure. Now for the grade 2 lineup, with the new ban list binding limiting certain cards, this is the setup I've done. So first of all, I've chosen 3 Voltage Horn Dragon. The reason why is, well, for its abilities, during your turn, if any card was binded, this gains 5k. So with the other grade 1 that gains power, that's always on 14k during your turn. So that would be quite good for attacks. The other reason I chose 3 is because when it attacks a Vanguard, if you counterblast 1, you could choose a card in your opponent's rear guard in the front row and bind it, and your opponent chooses a rear guard in the back row and moves it up. Now, in the same column. Now, the reason I chose this one is because use 3 instead of 4 is because although it's a great card, I feel like the opponent will use it target it quite a lot to prevent bindings. And also it always requires a counterblast, and in this deck it's quite a heavy counterblast deck, so I decided to use 3, and also it will help with another grade in here, and I will show that in just a bit. The other card I decided to include was Chateau, and 4 of them, because it's got 2 abilities. When it attacks a Vanguard, if you Soul Blast 1, you can draw a card, and then you can choose one of your opponent's rear guards in the front row and bind it. So it's an instant binding card and will allow you to summon the Fire Phoenix in your drop zones. So that's a good idea. And then when bound from hand during your turn, you may call this card the rear guard, and then if it's called this way, it gains 10,000 power. So that's quite good as well, Dragonic Vanquisher's ability, because then you don't really lose anything, and also you get to call a grade 2 rear guard with 10,000 power added. So you could put that on the rear guard and not on the Axel circle, and the opponent would have to use a 10k guard to block it. Another grade 2 to include, and this is optional but choice for you, is I chose this common card of the dragon because when it attacks, if it's a Vanquisher Vanguard, then you can Soul Blast, draw a card, and bind a card from your hand. And the reason it's quite good with that is because if you use it with Shatora or a Desert Gunner, then you can include an extra attack in your turn. So your opponent would have to be wary then of what cards are both in your hand and on your field, because with Fire Phoenix as well, you could get a card back. So it's quite a good overall card, but just be wary that with a Soul Blast and quite a few cards having a Soul Blast already, you do need to be wary of what's in your soul and how many times you want to use it, because if you have very little soul, you won't be able to attack much. And now with the last grade 2, is because of the ban list, you can only have 2 chosen now in your deck. And its abilities are, when played, you can counterblast 1 and choose a column, bind one of your opponent's front row rear guards in that column, and move up to 1 in the back row to the front row. So that's quite good if your opponent's got like a defensive unit and you want it gone or in the front so you can attack it. Or if they've got like a grade 2 protect unit or something like that, you can get rid of it straight away. Just be wary that since it targets, it won't be really getting rid of that Tachikaze card that prevents it from being targeted or and it gains 5,000 power for each gauge under it. Now, the main reason why this was limited to 2 is because at the end of the battle your Vanguard attacked, if your opponent's front row has no rear guard, you can counterblast 1 and stand this rear guard. So it actually works quite nicely with this card because you can call more units. This unit stands back up, so you could attack 4 times with the Vanguard, and then once the Vanguard happens, you could literally call more units out. So it could get up to consecutive attacks, and with Vanquisher's ability coming up, your opponent, even if your opponent draws a trigger, it may not help too much. And now for the grade 3 lineup, the main card, Dragonic Vanquisher. So during your turn, if a total of 3 or more cards of any players were bound, all units in the front row gain 10,000 power. So that's the reason why I didn't decide to do a front trigger, because with this unit adding 10,000 power already, even if the opponent gets a trigger, it's not gonna affect your game, because they would still have to guard with cards and not let many attacks go through. So, and with the good ability of this one is that with a counterblast of 1, you can choose one of player's front row rear guards and bind it. And if this card has a grade 3 soul in it, you and your opponent need to choose a card from their hands and bind it. So that actually works quite nicely, because then your opponent's got 2 cards, and then with 1 card bind, if you bind 1 more card or straight away, you instantly meet the first conditions. So you get to attack and add cards to your deck as well. If you got like Find a Fire Phoenix, call it to the field, or if a card was bound abilities and call it to rear guard, Sonic grade 2 and grade 1, that actually helps you because then you get extra power from them. And lastly, to include for Jaggy Short Dragoon. Now, this is quite a good card because when it attacks a Vanguard, you can bind the card from your hand and choose one of your opponent's front row rear guards and bind it. And also, and the good thing is with this, if your opponent has no rear guards in the front row, you get to draw a card. So it's quite a good card if you find all the cards because you get to replace cards you may be looking for, or get rid of Fire Phoenix so you can bring it back later. But it's up to you with the timings. And the second thing is, at the end of the battle when attacked, if your Vanguard is grade 3 Vanquisher, you can put this card in Soul and draw a card. So that actually works quite well if you're facing another Vanquisher deck or any cards that bind, because you get to put that card into the Soul to use for Soul Blast later, and you get to replenish your hand with another card. So overall, using this and this, along with some of the binding cards, explain why currently Narukami is quite a top deck meta at this moment, and hardly any people can beat the deck at this point. So thanks for listening, and if you enjoyed the video, give me a like or a comment, and I'll try and reply back as soon as possible. Thank you for listening.